the social learning effect in this particular case happens through the very closely knit network of physicians, and the scientific evidence, if you like, is the trigger that ignites the whole social network, and the information can travel very, very fast.
Hey there, my name is Eric, and this is Delve, the official thought leadership podcast of the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University. So today I'm speaking with Professor Demetrios Vakratsas, an expert in marketing here at Desautels. And we're talking about how doctors learn about new specialty drugs before they even hit the market. So when we think of marketing, we typically imagine it as something that happens after a product is launched. A company spends a couple years in R&D, puts their product to market, then it's on marketers to inform customers about the product and its features. But as Professor Vakratsas discovered in his research, things play out a bit differently for specialty drugs. Specialist doctors track the development of promising medications long before they hit the market. And once the drug is cleared for use with patients, these doctors know everything they need to start prescribing right away. So how do doctors learn about these drugs? And what's the role of marketers in this process? And what does this mean for the delivery of specialist care? So, to unpack it all, here's my conversation with Professor Demetrios Vakratsas. Let's delve into it. Professor Vakratsas, thank you for joining us on the Delve podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Okay, we have a lot to talk about today. Your research is very fascinating. We're talking about specialty drugs. We're talking about how they're developed. We're talking about how they reach patients, how they get in the hands of doctors. And more than that, we're talking about a phenomenon that you document well in your research, where doctors kind of learn about these drugs extremely early on in their development phase, before they're widely available. So I kind of want to explore how that works and what that means for the delivery of care in Canada and in the world. So there are a lot of angles to this, and I don't want to lose anyone. So I'm going to start by laying out some simple groundwork, and I'm going to hit you with a very nice and easy question. Just at a very high level, can you describe what is a specialty drug, just so we know what we're talking about?
Absolutely. In general terms, the specialty drugs are novel, complex, and important. They are based on advanced science, technological innovations, biology-based mixtures, difficult to identify. We don't need to get into too much detail about that. They treat rare diseases that they do need advances in terms of therapy, and they can be very effective, but also have risks and side effects. And of course, there is a major financial risk because these drugs are very, very expensive to acquire, and the cost of a therapy for a year can easily go to $750,000. So wow. It's a lot of money involved. It's a lot of pressure also for insurances, either private or public. Some of the therapeutic areas that these, just to provide an illustration, these drugs are for, oncology, I would say, is the banner disease because of its prevalence and conditions and all that, HIV drugs. And we also have a category of more life-enhancing or lifestyle-enhancing drugs like growth hormones. So in other words, diseases that are not necessarily life-threatening, but there are ways to improve conditions and basically the lifestyle of patients as well.
Yeah, and this is a challenging area of healthcare because it's like these are very specialized diseases that, might not necessarily respond well to traditional treatments. So then that kind of gets into what you documented in your paper, just looking at how doctors, specialists hear about these medications. So I'm curious if you can just walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah. So we have this concept in diffusion of innovations, the concept of social learning, that potential adopters learn from other adopters that have already used a product. Of course, physicians are not adopters of the product per se because they're decision makers, but the prescription decision is up to them, especially for specialty drugs because these are the kind of prescription decision required for a special drug or a specialty drug requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of information. So how does social learning occur for a specialty drug through the dissemination of scientific evidence. And this is the argument that we use in the paper. And it starts as early as going to a conference and presenting early results without necessarily having published these results in a scientific publication. Most of specialty physicians that prescribe this kind of drugs, about 60 to 70% in the cases that we studied in the paper, they're located in a university or university-affiliated hospital. They are in close proximity to physicians that actually conduct the clinical trials. Therefore, the social learning effect in this particular case happens through the very closely knit network of physicians, and the scientific evidence, if you like, is the trigger that ignites the whole social network, and the information can travel very, very fast about a specialty drug, and definitely before the drug hits the market.
And then when it does hit the market, people are primed to buy it, or to start using it.
To start, yes, because physicians are already, the physicians that are going to prescribe it, which are specialty physicians, already know about the drug. Now, of course, the more information is out there, the more scientific evidence is out there, the better it is. And this is something else that we find in the quality and the level of scientific evidence information. If you have a lot of studies by product launch and a lot of scientific evidence that points to the efficacy of the drug, then the faster that drug takes off, precisely because social learning already has taken place among the specialty physician community. And we have three buckets of information. All right? One is unpublished clinical trials and studies, and that is basically word of mouth, because specialty physicians who would tend to prescribe this drug are very close to centers that they conduct these clinical trials. Then you have, of course, published evidence and the citations off of that can create this network effect. And then, of course, you have clinical guidelines. And clinical guidelines, you can look at clinical guidance, so you can consider it clinical guidelines, as a meta-evidence, right? You have an expert panel that looks at all the evidence that is available for a particular drug, and then they write recommendations regarding whether, there is a preferred drug treatment or what not, and what is the preferred drug treatment. And we know, and of course we find also from the data that specialty physicians do look at clinical guidelines.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm just curious, is this a tactic? How does a drug developer insert themselves into a network as tight-knit as this one to help people become aware of this project that they're working on?
Yeah, this is a very interesting and a fascinating point, because let me step back a little bit. From a marketing perspective, obviously, I'm a marketing professor. I'm a marketing person, if you like. In this particular sector, would like to think that marketing can be very influential on the front end. Right after the product is launched, we're going to basically deploy our sales force. We're going to talk to the physicians, and of course, that kind of information that the sales force is given in this particular case, in this particular sector, is regulated. When you talk about efficacy, you have to talk about side effects. The information that you present to a physician as a sales force representative has to be balanced. Nevertheless, if you do follow this approach for specialty drugs and you go to specialty physicians, and you're a salesperson, they're going to tell you that they know this already. So we'd like to think that we can influence decisions as marketers using post-launch marketing. But in reality, and in doing this research, I talked to almost all the major pharmaceutical companies. Everybody knows that, this has to go through clinical trials and clinical studies. That's how drugs are developed. That's where you develop relationships also with the physicians, because it is the physicians and the top researchers that are going to conduct the clinical trial. Of course, the pharmaceutical manufacturer has to stand at arm's length, at least, according to regulations from them. Nevertheless, about 70%, I would say, globally of clinical trials and studies are sponsored by pharmaceutical firms, again, because of the cost involved. So everybody in the pharmaceutical sector knows that the first point of contact with the physician will be essentially through clinical trials or with the medical community, to say more precisely. And then the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, as we call them, who would be conducting these clinical trials, they would directly or indirectly spread the word.
Right.
And that's effectively how marketing starts. It's not the marketing that we know, typically through sales and advertising, etc., but it is an effort on behalf of a pharmaceutical firm to actually make sure that you get the medical community informed about your developments and make sure that the key leaders of the medical community are involved in clinical trials by conducting them.
I think it through just if multiple companies are developing a treatment for the same disease, are they competing against each other to get that small pool of doctors to be on their clinical trial? Because that sounds like to me it'd be an advantage if you can coax people into joining your team.
That's possible, and probably we may have seen this, I don't know, firsthand with the vaccine development for COVID. That it had 2 or 3 companies actually being successful in developing different forms of the vaccine, and for sure access to the top medical brains in terms of doing the trials, I think should play a role. But of course, what else plays a role is in developing the science, and that happens even before you conduct the clinical trial. So the science has to be available. The technology has to be available, it has to be feasible, and has to be feasible from a cost perspective as well. Because for each successful drug, firms spend on average, there are some numbers a little bit older, about $2.5 billion US. So that's and then for every drug that is successful, maybe there's like 6, 7 failures, maybe up to 10.
It's an expensive project, and and it's exciting because this sounds positive to me in that scientific evidence is really the driver here. Like, this is what's motivating these doctors to go with a particular medication. But I am curious about that push and pull between doctors and companies and what that relationship is. So you alluded to earlier that they kind of keep a hands-off approach. So doctors are kind of left up to themselves to test to do all the clinical trials to make sure that things are good. But then even before that, how do we decide which drugs are being developed in the first place? Who gets to set the agenda in that way?
Yeah. Like I said before, the science has to be there. The technological innovation has to be there. It could start with biotech firms, or it could start in-house with drug manufacturers. The feasibility of the science has to be there in terms of cost. The patient population, of course, because, we're talking about size of the market, right? Because all these projects are decided based on their net present value and the future profitability of the particular project, because as we said before, failure is accepted in this field. You cannot expect 100% success, which means that one successful innovation and product development, drug development, has to make up for the failures that happened in the past for a firm. So for sure, it's cost and profit driven, but you have to look also at disease prevalence, the societal impact of a disease, and the life improvement possibilities, and that's where non-profit contributions can come into play as well, or government subsidies can come into play, and that's where the input of physicians can come into play as well, because the physicians can give you a better idea of what should be what we call the drug profile, what should be the description of the drug, which populations it should treat, and the patient input is very important there as well. So all these factors, cost-related, size of the market, societal impact, input of physicians, at least leading research physicians and patients can come into play in making a decision and which market to go to, which drug to develop, and whether the science, of course, is available or is feasible at the present moment. And again, we're oversimplifying. I think we may make some people that know a little bit more about this subject angry, but it's so complex that we do have to, and it's a long process, so we do have to simplify a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. But I think you did a good job at laying out just all the possible variables. Even if it's not a substantive list, there's a lot of factors that go into deciding where we put that money. Because like you said, how expensive it is to, and looking at the impact to cost ratio and what the doctors are saying and what the other stakeholders are saying.
Yeah, and if I may add, just to add a layer of complexity, usually studies are done based on following what we call the protocol. Mm-hmm. And some of the costs in the development process occur because the protocol has to change. It has to adapt to better adapt to the needs of patients and what the drug should do, right? Or in other words, what the drug profile should be. And that's an opportunity for marketing as well, because if you get in the feedback of patients and physicians in a manner that complies with regulation, et cetera, then you may cut down on the cost of changing protocol designs and making the drug profile more accurate. And I think that's going to be a win for marketing as well, because we tend to think of marketers as pushers, and in this particular case, maybe it's a literal expression, not just a metaphorical expression. But a lot of things can happen behind the scenes in terms of marketing, helping and creating value by gathering up the input of physicians and patients, contribute to a better design of the protocol and profile of the drug. In other words, being the voice of the customer, so to speak, and working on pre-launch marketing as well as in post-launch marketing. Mm-hmm. But front end of the process, or back end of the process rather, is very important in this cases, and that's where, if you like, the game is.
Yeah, and it's like something that struck me just reading through your paper and talking to you a bit about it is just, this strikes me as an interesting collaboration between public and private sector, at least in Canada, where we have a public healthcare system. Other countries will be different, but it's, I don't know, like there's a partnership happening there. I'm curious to hear more about that dynamic, and what that means for that public-private debate.
I mean, it's the pharmaceutical sector is a big sector, and that can grant a lot of spillover benefits, right? It attracts science. When science is produced, jobs are created. People are cured, or at least they improve their life, at least for a while, especially in the more severe diseases. So there is a lot to be gained by collaboration, subsidies, most likely incentives in the form of tax credits, et cetera, because there are all these spillover effects or spillover benefits that are happening around the pharmaceutical sector, whatever it entails: science, technology, innovation, et cetera. So that has been happening. I think that should happen. But as we know also, incentives tend to move around. Sometimes you look at the pharmaceutical sector, sometimes you look more like a mainstream technology sector, et cetera. But that collaboration has to be there. I think it speaks volumes to the fact that most clinical trials are or have to be effectively sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, the manufacturer, the developers of the drug, just because of the cost involved. It's very difficult for a research team on its own. There are, of course, cases to develop clinical trials. Just recruiting patients in itself may be very, very difficult. So, yes, I think the collaboration has to be there. Is it kind of like a treacherous territory? It is. You have to be very careful, and you have to be compliant, but the opportunities are there.
I'm curious about other industries. Thinking about this works great in healthcare, but there are other science-based industries out there, something like climate change, for example, or I don't know, pick any other one. Would this kind of model be useful, in terms of just making scientific evidence the driver of your product?
Absolutely. In most of what we call B2B kind of industries, business to business industries, you have to take in the input of the customer. There is this concept of lead users that came out of MIT a few years back, where the idea and the principle is you bring in your best customers or your best knowledge customers into the process of developing a product. And I'll give you an example, aerospace. Aerospace it's aircraft making, if you like, is an industry which is in some ways similar to the pharmaceutical sector. It's evidence-based. You need to have the technology. There's a lot of moving parts because there's a lot of technologies and patents involved in developing a new aircraft. But and you have Airbus and Boeing, of course, the two major aircraft manufacturers. They would never think of developing the next generation aircraft without the input of at least the major airlines, their clients. The difference between the two sectors is that failure is expected in the pharmaceutical industry. Failure cannot be tolerated in the aircraft, and you cannot just come up with an aircraft that nobody wants. So yes, this is in technologically intensive industries, getting the input of your major customers or the customers that are in the know in terms of the technology. Absolutely, it's necessary and it happens.
Yeah. Well, my last question: how has this paper affected your view of marketing as a field, or or the process of the dissemination of knowledge and knowledge production? Has it changed your view on anything at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work on scientific evidence. I like to think that I produce some of it. Of course, marketing is not an exact science. Nevertheless, we have a journal that is called Marketing Science. So I felt very close to this project from a personal perspective. Although not all marketers like that, it changes a little bit the narrative about marketing. Just get ahead of the curve, get involved in the product development process, which is more like a value creation process, rather than just get involved only in what we call the value appropriation process, which, of course, come commercialization as a very useful function, but not just take the product as a given and try to convince, if you like, decision makers, physicians in this particular case, or clients that they need this product or this product is superior, but actually work on the backstage, if you like, in terms of helping making the product superior in the process. It's a more maybe boring idea of marketing, but when you look at it from a cross-disciplinary perspective, I think it can raise the profile of marketing within a firm, within a company, because it does emphasize the role of marketing and in value creation.
Yeah, definitely. It's not just like talking about something, it's actually participating in the creation of that thing. And that's true. That's a different way for marketers and communicators in general to be involved in a company and developing a product. Professor Vakratsas, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. So probably my favorite takeaway from this conversation is just how scientific evidence is at the center of specialty drug marketing. And I also find it hopeful to see how committed some doctors are to staying on top of the latest drugs and technologies that could help their patients. So thank you to Professor Vakratsas for sharing your expertise with us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. So if you enjoyed this interview, please let us know. Consider leaving a rating and a review to help us connect with others who want the latest insights from management experts like Professor Vakratsas. You can also sign up for our newsletter at delve.mcgill.ca. So McGill Delve is the official thought leadership platform for the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University. My name is Eric Dicaire, and I had the honor of being your host today. I'm also an assistant editor and producer on the show. Saku Mantere is our editor-in-chief, and he produced all the original music. Our next episode is coming out in 2 weeks, so we hope you'll tune in. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you then.